when I first started writing Trump and the American Future, it was at the peak of great economics, lowest black unemployment in modern history, lowest Latino unemployment. Everything was going well. We were negotiating toughly with the Chinese, but it seemed rational. And then boom, you start with what originally was the Chinese virus, now given a different name for political reasons. Then you go to the first time I've ever seen countries deliberately create a depression. Then you go to politicians deciding what you can and can't do. Then you go to people being totally fed up, weeks isolated, worried economically, and you have the tragic death of George Floyd, and all of a sudden the country seems to come apart at the seams. So if you had asked me, could I have imagined putting all of that together? I think the answer is no. I don't think I've written a bunch of novels. I don't know that I would have had the imagination to put them all. And I'm not sure, people would have said it wasn't believable. And of course, you also had impeachment in the middle of that. And you have all sorts of things. The level of turmoil in some ways resembles the late 1960s, except that the left is better organized and more totalitarian now than it was in the late 60s, but very similar kind of turmoil. I have a good friend who's a Civil War historian at Princeton who says that the language used to attack Trump resembles the slave-owning newspapers in South Carolina attacking Lincoln in 1860. So the level of vitriol and the nastiness and the degree of hatred is really unlike, even with Theodore or Franklin Roosevelt, you never got the depth of kind of things you're getting about Trump. And that of course all feeds into this whole ability to how do you mobilize a country where the country itself is deeply split. And a lot of people, as we found, a lot of people all of a sudden decided that, you didn't have to worry about social distancing as long as you were ideologically pure and doing the right thing. So, it's a very strange, very complicated time. We're clearly in a cultural civil war. I mean, you clearly have people who have accepted a Lenin, Stalin, Maoist view of how to organize and how to treat other people. You clearly have people who despise America. As Mark Thiessen wrote recently, when you refuse to stand for the national anthem, it's not because you're repudiating racism, it's because you're repudiating the United States. And you have a lot of that. You have a surprisingly large number of people today. It's almost like the radical generation of the 60s has now had almost 50 years to grow and strengthen and gather more force. And so in that sense, I think we are in a very deep cultural war, which will in many ways have a huge effect on what kind of country we become over the next half century. You look at all that and you just think, this is truly a cultural civil war. Then, Black Lives Matter is popular right now because it's a slogan. But when you actually look at the organization, which has as one of its explicit goals, the destruction of the nuclear family. Now, why they want to destroy the nuclear family, I'm not sure. It strikes me as irrational socially and a guaranteed step towards weakness, but it's in there. I mean, and you realize that the people who founded Black Lives Matter are inherently anti-American in the sense that they want a totally different America and they want to replace the America that exists today. The other example is the congresswoman from Minnesota who's Somali by background. How you can leave Mogadishu for Minneapolis and have a grudge rather than gratitude, I think is one of the great things worth studying. She left a society which is a disaster, dominated by warlords, people starving, no sense of individual opportunity, a very oppressive behavior for women, to come to the freest, most open society in the world. And she's angry. Now, and I sort of look at all that and I don't get it. You'd think that it's, and in fact, I'd be curious if somebody, I'm trying to get a friend of mine who lives out there to go to ask her, does she really think Mogadishu is better than Minneapolis, because she behaves like we've somehow done her a terrible injustice by making her be an American. I mean, I've had very famous African Americans tell me, and Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, in introducing the bill on police reform, said, I think he was stopped 6 times last year. And he's a U.S. senator. So I think in that sense, we have to start by acknowledging that it is more challenging to be Black and that there are inherent difficulties you have to overcome. The question then becomes, and I think it's a really simple test, which I'm going to be writing about, and that is it more important for Blacks to succeed or for whites to feel guilty? Now, for some bizarre reason, the left has decided that white guilt, and announcing that you're guilty, feeling bad about being guilty, taking a knee to prove you're guilty, somehow achieves things. And I said in an interview with NPR yesterday, I'd be a lot more sympathetic to all of the multimillionaire NFL players who want to take a knee if they each went out and founded a charter school and actually helped children succeed. But I'm totally unimpressed by people who America have made into millionaires, who now want to impose on the rest of us their particular viewpoint. And so I think we need a conversation. And the nice thing about the left is they can't contain themselves. And because they own the news media, they have no feedback mechanism to say you're nuts. So, for example, the California Assembly just passed by 56-5, creating a commission on reparations, which is the #1 goal of the Black Caucus in the California legislature. Well, reparations is both morally and mechanically hopeless. And it's a fight that the left will lose badly, but they just have to do it. They can't stop themselves. Pelosi's $3 trillion bill includes paying $1,200 per person to every illegal immigrant in the United States as part of the stimulus. Now, that's overreach on a scale which I suspect 75 or 80% of the country will disagree with. And they just go through item after item like this. So if they had some ability to be self-disciplined, they'd probably be dramatically more dangerous than they are. I think in the world before the pandemic and before the Depression, it was easier to imagine Trump really continuing to solve things at a rate that was amazing. Now we're in a situation so complicated and with so many different unknown parts that I think we're all going to have to pitch in to solve things. I don't think Trump by himself can be the solution. I think he can lead the solution, but it's going to take millions of Americans to get us out of the ditch that we're now in. The idea that Washington, who more than any other single person, created the framework within which people could say that their rights came from God and not from the king, or that Jefferson, who actually wrote the words, that these people are anything less than historically astonishing figures who advanced the cause of human freedom is an absurdity. But what you're dealing with is a mob. The mob has no mind. It has emotion. And it doesn't understand that it's beginning to set up patterns that are totally unacceptable. And I think very, very dangerous. And by the way, in Seattle, Washington, in the middle of all of this new purity, there is a 7-foot-tall statue of Lenin, which was put there years and years ago. Some guy bought it when it was being thrown away at the fall of the Soviet Union. Well, I don't object to Lenin being there because I think it's a great opportunity to teach people what a monster he was and how many people's lives were destroyed by him. But, as a conservative, I mean, if they get to knock down Jefferson, can I knock down Lenin? And then you just look at that stuff and think this is crazy. But it's both an act of cultural warfare and it's an act of proving that they have the energy and the drive and the courage to rebel. So you have to see it as both things coming together. And I think it's a very, very dangerous pattern. But again, it goes back to this idea that for 3 generations, we've told people things that are lies. Reagan once said, it isn't what they don't know that is so troubling, it's what they know that isn't true. And I think that's what we're seeing today. I worry much more about Democrats stealing the election as they do in California with, with vote harvesting than I do about the Chinese or the Russians. Then I think the president has a huge opportunity to win. If the economy stumbles and it feels like whatever Trump's magic was, he ain't got it anymore, then I think there's a problem. The challenge for the Democrats is I did a newsletter the other day on Biden, Schumer, Pelosi as a machine. And I said, this is not an election between President Trump and President Biden. It's an election between President Trump and a machine, of which Biden is the weakest of the three. And so a number of friends wrote me or called me and said that it really scared them. When you start thinking about what Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer would be like in a room with nobody, no supervision, it would be wild. And so I think for the moment, it's truly ironic. Biden is a candidate who is so weak that the longer he can hide, the better off he is. And so I think it's the morning he starts campaigning, if he ever does, it will be so painful to watch his inability to function that I think he could melt pretty quickly. I mean, this is a guy, remember that as early as, I think, the summer of 16, people were writing columns that say, we might have to impeach him. On the day he was sworn in, the Washington Post had an article about whether or not Trump would be impeached. So he has had 92 or 93% hostility every single day from winning the election to today. If he had not had a huge social media base, he'd have been broken. As it is, he actually has a slight advantage. He doesn't just fight him to a standstill. He's gotten a lot more people thinking about fake news than I would have thought likely 2 or 3 years ago. Clarissa and I had the experience of going up to Turin, which has the second largest Egyptian collection outside of Egypt, for strange reasons. But anyway, so we got a guide to take us through this museum. And we're going through one of the halls, and he points to a statue. And he says, people will tell you X, but that's fake news. And I found myself thinking, wait a second. I have an Italian guide in an Egyptian museum using Donald Trump's language. Now that's cultural impact. And so I would say that, I wish he was a little more disciplined, and I wish he probably deleted at least 10% of his tweets before he sent them. But having said that, his ability to keep pounding away, I think, has saved his presidency, and he would have been crushed in a pre-information age environment, because the media hates him at a level I've never seen any candidate. And I think he learned from that his instincts were better than theirs. And that's the other thing to remember. And it's why people like John Bolton go nuts, and other people who are never Trumpers. Trump is a genuinely disruptive figure who came in from the outside, determined to change things. Well, everybody who has a big investment in the old order is going to be terrified and offended and, say, how can you do this? Well, that's what he was elected to do. That's why he won. And I think so in many ways, when he's living out what is his commitment that got him elected, the more traditional members of the establishment are deeply offended both by his language and by the risk-taking, and but in fact, he's pretty shrewd and he's pretty clever.